Okay, we are on Zephyr, and we are looking at the Westerbeek 2-cylinder diesel engine, and we've taken all the covers off and are at the back of the engine because we're first going to look at the strainer. And we can see that the strainer, putting a light behind it, is nice and clear. No seaweed. Okay, so we are going to get the through hole open and also at the same time take the key off so the through hole is open, full open position. And that is the raw water which cools the engine's internal freshwater system. So that raw water comes over here. This is that hose that, after the strainer, comes along the back of the engine. And we are now looking at the raw water pump. Actually, the back of it, but that's how you would access it to change the impeller. You have to take off 6 slot screws, which are in close proximity to both the dipstick and oil filter. So really about the only way to do that is to have a little small 90-degree screwdriver that could open that. We really should change those to Allen head, which would be easier to deal with. That water then comes to the heat exchanger, and we have going in, goes down, comes back, and goes out. So this is raw water in, raw water out. The coolant is over here, antifreeze, and these 2 lines go off to the water heater. But let's look at the raw water output, because that then goes over and is injected, use the light over here, injected into the exhaust at this point, and that water and exhaust goes over to this compartment, which is a aqualift. It's rather different from some of the other aqualifts, but has the same function. The water and exhaust mix, and the water is pushed out by the exhaust. It also has a drain on the aft side of it, such that if the engine had cranked for more than 30 seconds, you would want to drain the aqualift. That would just drain the water into the bilge. Otherwise, it will back up into the engine, most likely destroying the engine by getting water into the aft cylinder. Looking at the coolant lines, so we have, this is the engine fresh water, goes off to the water heater, comes back, goes back into the engine reservoir. There is then a separate reservoir under the sink that this tube goes off to. Again, we're looking under the sink, and way in the back is the reservoir for the engine coolant, 50/50 water antifreeze. Using a small cup is a good way to fill it, but really that should be moved into the cockpit lazarette, like most of the other boats. And the radiator cap, so to speak, on top of the reservoir, don't remove that unless you're adding a significant quantity or changing the antifreeze. And again, this is water, 50%, 50% antifreeze. Okay, while we're back here, let's talk about this stuff. Okay, so changing subjects a little bit, as we're sitting in the back of the engine, we'll talk about the fuel. The fuel line comes from The fuel tank, which is in the back, can be accessed by the aft starboard lazarette. Comes up to a separator. If we put our light behind there, you see a beautiful pink color, and that is the diesel at the separator section of the filter. And if you were to see any white milky substance in there, that would be water, and it would need to be drained out. The fuel then comes through this hose to a lift pump, which is this metal can, and it's an electric lift pump, makes a clicking sound. This is the electrical to it. If this were to become separated, this is just a spade connector. If that were to become separated, then the lift pump wouldn't work. So that would be one thing to check if you don't hear the lift pump. That fuel then goes to a filter, which sits right here, and then goes into the high pressure pump, which can be seen best from the front, and that's nice and shiny because that's been replaced recently. From the high pressure pump into the injectors, that's a metal lines because it is very high pressure. Okay. Also, back here we have the glow plugs, one for each cylinder, and those are provided current through a solenoid, which is right back here, and this gets is energized when you turn the key to the on position for both the lift pump and the glow plugs, and it likewise has a electrical input that if we're disconnected, you wouldn't get any power to the glow plugs. While we're talking about DC power, we have a 20 amp breaker right here. It's a button type breaker. This provides the DC power to the instruments in the cockpit, and so if you were to turn on the key and you didn't hear the oil pressure alarm, or the instruments didn't turn on, it's possible that this breaker has popped. All you have to do is push it in and it resets. This boat got towed back from Santa Cruz Island once because the skippers didn't know that. We also have a variety of other connections from the engine up to the instruments. If one of the instruments isn't working, like the fuel gauge or oil pressure, it could be one of these connections. You can just check them and just make sure they're nice and snug and not corroded. They all look pretty good right now. Okay, while we're back here, over next to the Aqualift is a pump. That is actually the bilge pump for this boat. Most boats have the bilge pump in the bilge with the float switch. Since the bilge on this boat is really small, they have put the bilge pump back in the aft berth right next to the Aqualift. So if there was ever a problem with the bilge pump, that's where it is. One thing we haven't covered is checking the oil. Unfortunately, they have put the dipstick, or I should say, the dipstick is in a normal place. There's just a big post in the way, so it's a little difficult to get it out. So I'm going to reach in, pull it out, and it's reading full. They must have changed the oil recently because it's not as dirty as normal. So then sliding it back into place, making sure it locks down tight. Okay, well, we're again looking at the Zephyr's Westerbeek 2-cylinder diesel, and if we look under it, where the white absorber is, it's not white. It's got a tinge of pink. That means there is possibly a very small diesel leak that will need to be looked at. So if you look at this white pad and it's black, it's an oil leak. If it's yellow, it's a coolant leak, and pink is diesel. So that's a good indicator that there's a slight leak. It's not super bad because it's only lightly pink, but will need to be looked at. We have the belt. Always want to make sure that is snug and you have a spare on board. We talked a little bit about the coolant system. Here is the coolant coming from the reservoir going to the coolant freshwater pump, which then goes off to the heat exchanger, and we've talked about that already. Also here we have two senders. One is for the oil pressure. This has a little spade connector, so if the oil pressure alarm does not turn off, you can always make sure that this is plugged in properly. This unit right next to it is also a oil pressure sender, but this actually goes to a meter, so it gives you a reading of what the oil pressure is. So you've got actually two units for oil pressure. Up here we have the engine temperature gauge. So if you weren't getting any reading, you could always check this connection. Add oil here if you do need to add the oil. And let's see, you have the throttle and then the shutoff. So again, if these became disconnected, you could always operate manually. Something important on this engine, and you're going to want to point right in here. This is where the DC comes, and there's a connection right here. So from the battery, this is going to the starter solenoid, but it's also where power gets distributed, for example, to that 20 amp breaker, which then feeds back to the instrument panel. So if you, there have been cases where those have, due to the vibration of the two cylinder, have come either loose or separated. That's where you would look. One other thing that's important is this wire, which is going to the a spade connector on the starter solenoid, and that comes from the instrument panel. When you push the button to start the engine, that's what provides the 12 volts to the solenoid, which then dumps current into the starter motor. So if you push the button and nothing happens, that connection may have failed. So that's an important one. And I'm mentioning these because all these things have happened in the past. Okay, so we are in the main salon of Zephyr, and looking at the electrical panel. And like most of the boats, I'm going to go ahead and move this light out of the way. The AC is on the left. You have a master breaker. You can see that there's actually, the AC is still on, so we're on shore power. And below that, there are three switches, two of which are in or on, and that's the electrical outlets and the battery charger. There is a water heater, which can, if we were to push this in, and that is in the on position, is now the water heater is on the shore power. So if you were sitting here and wanted hot water in the slip, you can, without running the engine, you can turn that on and get hot water. But we don't want that on when we're not on the boat, so that always should be left off when you leave the boat, and it says leave out. So then on the right-hand side, we have our standard selector for the batteries. There are 2 batteries here, and you can see battery 1 is listed for the motor. You can switch over to battery 2, which is house, or you can go with both batteries. And we're going to go ahead and leave that off for now, but then you have your switches, and we can actually look at the batteries. And so we're on battery 1, which is the motor battery, and it's reading about 13 because it's on the charger. And the house battery is also reading about 13. So the rest of these switches are pretty much self-explanatory, and you can just select whatever you need. Okay, we're going to look at the batteries because they're right below. So we are taking the cushion off, and you can see there's also some charts here, as well as a hatch cover. But right here we have battery 1 and battery 2. They're labeled here, and those are separate, so you can select one or the other. And these are actually 2 different types of batteries. Battery 1 for the motor provides high current over short duration. Battery 2, which is the house, is a slow drain type of battery that will not a lot of current, but it will provide current, but over a longer duration. Now, you can use this to start the engine if this battery has gone south, but ideally, house battery, or excuse me, the battery 1 for the motor is used for starting the motor, and battery 2 is for house when you're at anchor. So if you're just out day sailing, have them on battery 1 to start. However, once you're out motoring, if you want to charge both batteries, you have to be on both. That way the alternator would charge both of them. Okay. Also back here, we have the pressurized water pump. So this boat does have a pressurized freshwater system, and to get that to operate, in fact, we can go ahead and we're going to go put on house, and then we go to water pressure, and we can hear it pressurizing, and then it stopped. So if we go to the sink, we can now get fresh water, and you can hear the pump turns back on when you actually use the water. So one thing you always want to remember is to close those valves, because if you happen to turn this on and there's a valve open in the sink, it will start pumping, and if nobody's paying attention, it will empty the tank. That happened recently on a boat. In any case, I'm going to turn this off, but it is nice having a pressurized freshwater system. The freshwater tank is actually right under here, and so the fill is on the port side. We are now going to come over to the head and take a look. And since we still have that, well, I'll go ahead and put that pressurized water back on. We can actually turn this valve, and you should get the water flowing as well. So that can actually be used as a shower in addition. That should lift up, and so you could actually shower off. There's also a shower on the swim step, which is really handy for when you come out of the water and want to get some of the salt water off. Okay, so this is a pretty standard head. In fact, under the sink, there's one through hole which is for the sink, but for the actual head, we have to go to another compartment. And we're going to do that now. So in this compartment, we have and I'll open it. This is the through hole for the intake to the head. And so you would want to open this when you use the head, and the head pumps into the holding tank, which is just forward of this under here, and hence we have a macerator outlet. You can see that valve. The macerator itself is right here. So if you were offshore, wanted to empty the holding tank, you open the macerator through hole, and then go to the switch on the panel, which says macerator pump, and only turn this on if that valve is open. Otherwise, the motor can burn out quite quickly. Up forward on Zephyr, we've actually cleared out everything in the forward berth, and some interesting things. I'm going to show you a couple of them real quick. We lift up the cushion, we actually see that there is a table here. And I'm going to go ahead and pull this out. So if you were cruising and you wanted to set up the table, it's a little bit of work, but we'll get to that in a second. But then we can see also here, we have another compartment, and you can see it's labeled here, knot meter, depth sounder, under hatch. We open this, we see also there's a lot of life jackets, but the depth sounder and the knot meter impeller are right here. If your knot meter is not working, you could pull this out, put the plug in, and clean that, and hopefully get it back operating again. So we're going to go ahead and put this back. We're going to go ahead and move these cushions out of the way. And we see that there is another little compartment under here. I'm going to go ahead and put this up out of the way. So we've got a tarp, some sort of a step, radar reflector, and the pump for the dinghy, but also we have a tube. This is a multifunction tube because it actually has some charts in it, but that also fits here. And we can put then the table up. So you have a nice little table. There's another feature that this part of the cushion also sits right in here and can be locked in place to extend that berth. So now it's more than just child size. So a number of different features on this Catalina 270. Okay, so we are going to put stuff away. First, this tube with charts. Go back in here. We will put this into the down position. Okay, so again, looking at some of the plumbing on Zephyr. Under the sink, we will see a through hole, which is for the sink drain, but also you see there's a valve here which goes off and disappears. It actually goes over to the ice box, and there is a foot pump. We actually open this. This will drain the ice box. So there was actually water in it because I can hear it gurgling, so we're going to open this through hole. And we can hear some water draining. Okay, we're going to take a look at the lazarettes. This is the large lazarette, and we have, first thing we see is a 30 amp master breaker. That's for the shore power coming in. You can see the shore power cord is right here, and that's where the shore power plugs in. And then this breaker, if you were able to not have shore power, checking that breaker is one of the things to do. We also have a couple toolboxes, some spare lines. Another important feature is the emergency tiller, which is right here. That would be plugged into the hole under the seat, which goes right on the rudder post. So you open up that compartment, put the emergency tiller in, and you'll be able to steer the boat without the wheel. Also in here we have the water heater. And again, this water heater is heated by the engine because the coolant comes through here. So if you ever had a coolant leak, one possibility would be where these hoses come in. Also, tucked back in here, we have the battery charger. So if there was ever a problem with the battery charger, that's where it is. Okay, so that pretty much is everything in this lazarette. Now we're going to go to the aft port lazarette. Ooh, and everything's wet here. Okay, so find a couple things in here. One, hanging on this line, is the handle for the emergency bilge pump, which is manual, and this would pump out the bilge. So we also have a portable bilge pump that could be used either on the boat or on the dinghy. Pretty standard small bilge pump. Okay, as long as we're here, we will take a look at the propane tank. Here's a standard propane tank. Go ahead and open the valve. When I do that, we can see that we get 100 psi of pressure. I'll go ahead and close the valve, but that just tells us there is some propane. It doesn't tell us how much. And really, to get a measure of how much propane, you want to lift it, and my calibrated arm says this is probably almost full. We do, on some of the boats, have scales, and the full and empty weight is stamped on the tank, so you can actually determine how much is in it. Also, besides the gauge and a regulator, we have a electric valve which is turned on by a switch on the DC panel. So you're not going to get any propane until you turn that on. Another safety feature. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and put this back. Also, while we're looking in here, we'll see some hoses and such. That's actually the swim step shower. We take this seat off. And we have the shower head, and then a red for hot and a blue for cold, so you can get hot or any temperature you want, as long as the engine has been running. This is the aft starboard lazarette, which has a couple of important items, one of which is the stern anchor chain and rod. This is a Danforth anchor, and next to it is the all-important barbecue, which if you're out on the islands, definitely like to have a barbecue. Also, if we look down here, we see a metal box. That's actually the fuel tank and the hose that feeds the fuel tank. And there's actually a shut-off valve, which is just a little bit inboard of that tank if you needed to shut off the fuel to the engine. Here is the fill point for the diesel, and again, you always have to remember to add the additive, the bug juice, before you actually put fuel in. Hope you enjoy this video, and definitely watch it before your first training. Thanks.